Hey everybody, welcome to Board Game Heaven. My name is Raymond, and in this video I'm going to do a review of Ready Steady Worm by River Horse Games, which is set in the world of Jim Henson's Labyrinth. This is a racing and betting sort of game for 2 to 4 players, which plays in about 20 minutes for ages 6 and up. And in this video I'll explain how to set up the game, and I'll explain the rules, and I'll give you my final thoughts. To set up the game, start with the board. The board is made out of several of these puzzle pieces. You can puzzle them together in any order, and you can use either side. So in this case, I'm using this side, and you can just puzzle them together. This is the middle ring. The center ring is just one piece, and also here you can choose either side, and you can orient it this way or that way, any way you want. And finally, take the outer ring and again choose which side to use. One side has the hedges and the other side has the walls from the Goblin City, and just arrange them in any order you want and simply put them together like so. And again, you can rotate them a little if you want to align these lines. It doesn't matter how you put it together. Then you take the 4 worm miniatures and place them randomly on the 4 spots on the center tile, like so. Take the 4 worm tokens and randomly deal them out to the players that are playing the game. And these are to be kept secret by the players. Place the 3D podium nearby, as well as the dice. Take all the goblin and jewel cards and just shuffle all of those together and form a stack that you keep near the board. And if you're playing with Alexa, you can optionally shuffle in these 5 Alexa cards as well. Then starting with the youngest player, each player draws 3 cards, or optionally you can just deal each player 3 cards. And now you're ready to play. The goal of the game is, of course, to be the player with the most points. Now, you are not actually playing one of these worms. Everybody can bet on all of these worms to win, because these worms will be moving outward of this labyrinth, and as soon as one of the worms exits just by reaching the edge and moving out of that, they will be placed on the podium. And of course, the first worm to do so gets first place, then the second gets second place, and the third gets third place, and then the game stops. So the 4th one will not get a place on the podium. And every time when a worm exits the labyrinth, all the players show their current hand and check which of these gems, if they have any, matches the color of the worm that just exited. So for example, had the yellow worm just exited the labyrinth and been placed on the first spot there, and this was my hand at that time, then I have 2 matching gems, which will be worth 2 points at the end of the game. So I simply take these, I just keep them underneath my secret token, and we'll have a look at that. So I have the red worm, and the other players will have different worms, of course, and any tokens that aren't used in the game because you're not playing with 4 players are also kept secret and just set aside. Now, points work as follows. So any matching gems you have at the end of the game that match the first worm to have exited will be worth 1 point each. The second worm is going to be worth 2 points for each gem, and the third one 3. So the further along you are in the game, the more points worms will score if they exit and you have matching gems. But your own token is also worth points. So in my case, I have the red one. Now, if the red worm was the first one to have exited the labyrinth and got first place, then my token would be worth 6 points. And the second place, so let's say that's blue, got second place, and that player would score 4 points for their token. And the last player, or the third player I should say, gets 2 points. And if a player had the yellow token, then that would be worth 0 points, because they would be the last worm left in the labyrinth. So once again, every time a worm exits the labyrinth, you simply play out your entire hand. You keep the matching gems that match the worm that just exited, and that you put those underneath your token and just keep them to the end of the game. And any other cards that were on your hand and that did not match the worm's color are simply discarded and placed next to the draw pile. And after everybody has done that, the discard pile is shuffled back into the draw pile. Every player draws 5 new cards from the deck, and you keep 3 of those. So you discard 2 back into the discard pile, and play continues with the remaining worms. So how does the race work? So again, let's say this was my starting hand here, and I know I have the red token. I'll just keep it open for the sake of the video. Then every player takes turns doing 2 things. The first thing a player does is roll the dice. So you simply take the dice and you roll them and you check the result. Now the white die determines which worm will move, and the red die determines how they will move. So in this case, the green worm would move clockwise. So let's take a closer look at these dice. So the white die has a green face, a yellow face, a red face, and a blue face, one for each of the worms. There is one face that moves all of the worms, and the owl lets the person who rolled the dice pick any worm of their choosing. The red die has a face that moves a worm or all of the worms outside, so outwards towards the edge of the board. That is on there twice. There is a face that lets a worm move more to the center. There's a clockwise and a counterclockwise movement. And again, there's the owl, which lets you pick which way they move. If a worm cannot move in the direction that was rolled, so let's say again, for example, we had the green one move clockwise, then it couldn't move because those spots are both taken here, and a worm can only occupy one space, so you can't have multiple worms in one space, and movement is also one space every time they move. So it can't move clockwise because that is taken. Then a worm will move in the opposite direction, which in this case is also not possible. And if that's also not possible, then the player gets to choose a direction. So in this case, it could move either here or here. And sometimes if you get to pick which worm is going to move, it can be very strategic to pick a worm that cannot move in a certain direction to make it move in the opposite direction. And if you roll the face that lets all the worms move, you get to pick in which order they move. So, you know, if for some reason you wanted this one to move outwards, if you rolled this result, for example, then you could just move this one first and then this one following in that space. But that's entirely up to you. You could also say I'm moving this one first, which it can't, so it's going to move in the opposite direction, and then I'll move that one if you happen to have the green worm and you know one of your opponents has the red worm. So that could be a strategic decision as well. But if you roll the face that has all the worms move, they all move in the same rolled direction, even if you roll the owl. So if you get to pick which direction they move, you pick one direction for all of the worms to move in. And of course, if you roll 2 owls, you simply get to pick a worm and move it in any direction you wish. And again, anytime when a worm, let's say this was over here, and you rolled this result, then the green worm moves outward, it escapes the labyrinth, and then the turn is immediately over. You place that worm on the podium and you start playing your cards like I explained before. Now, if you roll a color of a worm that is already outside of the labyrinth, then you again get to pick which worm to move. So that's basically how the worms will move, just simply by rolling the dice. Now, after a player has done that, the second thing they can do on their turn is to play or discard cards, or simply to pass. So if you want to play a card, now these are just gem cards, so nothing happens there, but the deck also has goblin cards. So let's just take a look. Here is the Goblin King, for example. There are several different ones. There's hedging, sliding, there's a pole vault, a worm swap, and a nice cup of tea, and I'll explain all those cards in a bit. But should you have one of those cards on your hand, so let's say this was actually my hand, then I could, after rolling and moving a worm, I could play one of these cards and simply do what it says, just play the effect on the card. So I'll go over all of those cards in just a bit. But another thing you can do is discard any number of cards. So if you have cards that you don't find useful, so for example, I have these cards and I don't think anything is going to happen soon with these worms, they're not going to escape. I could say, well, I'm not keeping these, I'm just going to discard all of them, for example, and simply draw 3 new cards. That didn't really improve my situation, but you could just draw a card that's more suitable, maybe a green one. And I wanted to keep the green one because, you know, the green one is furthest away to the exit. And the third option is if you have a good hand of cards, you can simply pass and don't do anything else. And that's your turn. So then the turn passes to the next player. That player rolls the dice. And then all the worms in this case move counterclockwise. So in any order, so I could say, well, I want to move this one first counterclockwise, but that's not happening, so it's going to move that way. This one also, I could just move them counterclockwise, starting with the red one, but you can also just choose to do it differently. And then move this one counterclockwise, so that goes in a different direction. This one too, that goes in a different direction, if I wanted to. And this one just simply moves in this direction. And after they've rolled their dice, they either play a card, discard cards and draw new ones, or simply pass, etc. So let's now take a closer look at the different action cards, the goblin cards as they are called. So this is the worm swap. Choose any 2 worms and swap their positions. So that means you can simply pick a worm and swap places. It's very simple. There's the nice cup of tea. Place a worm on its side, and the next time that worm would move, place it upright again. So that means I pick a worm, place it on its side, and then the next time it would move, so either by rolling the red symbol on either of these faces, or from an action card, for example, then instead of moving, it is simply placed upright back again. There's the pole vault. And that tells you to move a worm 1 space over a wall. So that means it has to be able to cross a wall section. So like this, for example. And of course, that space has to be empty. So there can be another worm here because then it is prevented from going that way. And the card can be used to pole vault over a wall that's blocking the exit in order to escape the labyrinth. Then there's the slide card. Move a worm in the direction it has just moved until it hits an obstacle. So if from a die roll, so for example like this, the green worm moved in the counterclockwise direction, I could play the slide card and now the worm would slide on until it hits a wall over here. There's also the hedging card. With this card, I can draw 3 cards and then discard 2 cards. And those can be cards that I just drew or cards from my hand. And finally, there's the Goblin King. And that lets you choose a wheel and rotate it. And you can choose any of the 3 rings. You simply either rotate the center ring, the middle ring, or the outer ring until it matches up with the lines again. So that would be 1 spot to this side or 1 to the other side, for example, like that. Or I could rotate the outer ring like so, or in the other direction like so. A couple of things to remember is that you should always have 3 cards in your hand at the start and the end of your turn. If you ever need to draw a card from the draw pile and it's empty, you simply shuffle the discard pile and place a new deck face down to create a new draw deck. And if after one player's turn there are no more worms on the centerpiece, you take out the centerpiece and it is removed from the game, which means worms can no longer re-enter that spot. And that's all there is to it. Let's quickly do a scoring example. So let's say the red worm was the first to exit, then the blue one, and then the green, then the blue one should be in second place, and then the green one. And I happen to have, let's say, I've collected several cards during the game, and every time one of them exited, so let's say I had this hand when the red worm exited, so I had this one, these would have been discarded, and during a later turn the blue one exited and I had this on my hand, so these were blue, placed under my scoring stack, this was discarded. And then finally the green one exited, and maybe this was my hand. I didn't have any green ones, so all of that was discarded as well. And that was at the end of the game. After 3 worms had escaped, that was my loot pile. So I check my token, which is red, so that means 6 points. Then this is worth 1 point for first position, so that's 7. And I have 3 blue gems at second place, so these are worth 2 points each, so that's 6 points, giving me a total of 13 points at the end of the game. And let's just say that these cards were this player's scoring stack. They had the blue worm, so that's 4 points for coming in second, and they had these cards, so 2 red ones at first place is 2 points, and the yellow one, which is worth 0 points, so that's 6 points in total. And maybe that player managed to score some more cards. Let's just see, or actually there can't be any yellow ones in there. So they had 4 of these green ones, 1 blue one, and they were the green player. So that means 2 points for coming in third, 2 points for the blue one, so that's 4 points, but they have 4 green gems at third place, so that's 4 times 3 is 12 points, giving them a grand total of 16 points, which means that that player would be the winner of Ready Steady Worm. So those are all the rules. Let's go to my final thoughts. So my final thoughts on Ready Steady Worm by River Horse. Let's start with the components. First of all, I really like the insert of the box. They made a good insert that has a spot for everything. It holds the board pieces, it holds the worms, the cards, and everything. The only thing I would have improved is made the card slot deeper so that you could actually sleeve your cards and would still fit in there. So that's the only caveat I have here. Otherwise, this insert works really well. The board itself is also of a good quality. The cardboard is nice and thick. It's really nice, and it is printed on both sides, and it has these puzzle pieces that work very well as well. And I love that you can use both sides. So you have the hedge maze on one side of the outer ring and the walls on the other side. And in the inner circle you have either the Goblin City, or on the other side, the trash ladies kind of junkyard. So we have that, and in the middle piece, you've got a dungeon on one side and Jareth's throne on the other. You can even see a shadow of Jareth there, which is really nice. There's a lot of detail in the artwork, but more on that in just a second. We've got the cards, which are also of a decent and normal quality. They look very well. The print is well done and colorful. And of course, the miniatures are also pretty cool. They are really nice looking, detailed little worms. The only thing is that they are, of course, all the same in different colors. I would have kind of liked to see 4 different sculpts, because if you look at the tokens with the different colors of worms, they did actually make different artwork for all of the different worms. But the models are sadly the same. I do like that they added this little podium as well. That's a nice little touch that you can put the worms on when they exit the labyrinth. And finally, there's these dice that are nice and chunky. They are printed, so I don't know how long the prints will hold up, but it looks like they can take some handling and some rolling, of course. Doesn't look like that will scratch off easily, but time will tell. But they do look really nice, and I like the fact that they are a little bit larger than normal, so you have two chunky dice to roll. So the components, all in all, are quite good. The artwork, like I said, is really nice. The cards are pretty simple. The artwork works, it's nice and colorful. You can immediately tell which colors of gems they are. And as an extra bonus, all the gems also have different shapes, which helps if you're colorblind, of course. So you can kind of tell the shapes. You only have to remember which worm is, of course, which color. So that might be a little bit tricky, but at least they took that into account on the cards. The artwork on the board is really nice. Like I said, you have these 4 different areas of the labyrinth that you can use, and you can mix those puzzle pieces up any way you want, creating a new labyrinth every time you play. And of course, the art for the different worms on these tokens is pretty funny as well. It's a little bit of a comic book style, but that works, I think. So the theme, I think the theme really works for this. Now, basically, this is a labyrinth game in which these worms need to race to the outer circle and get out. And I think that could have worked with just about any theme, but it works well because of the rotating labyrinth. It kind of feels like they had this idea of Jim Henson's Labyrinth with the rotating labyrinth and the walls and everything that changes constantly, just like in the movie. And they wanted to make a game based on that principle. And I think they did that really well. It doesn't feel like they came up with a racing game first and then slapped on the theme later. So I think they did that really well. It does really feel like the labyrinth, of course, because of the art in the first place. But, you know, the rotating gimmick is really cool. There's 3 cards that rotate the labyrinth in the deck, and every time one of the worm escapes, you shuffle all of those cards back. So you might see those several times. And so, yeah, I think the theme was done pretty well in this case. So the gameplay, let's talk about the gameplay. It is, of course, a bluffing game. It's a press your luck game, and there's some randomness with the dice rolling, of course. But when you roll the free to choose option, so the owl face on the movement and on the worm dice, you get to choose yourself which direction the worms move and which worm you want to move. And you can use that to your advantage, of course. If you have one of these worms and you want that to finish first, that's your primary goal, of course. And that works. I think that's done really well. And even if you roll the die with the 4 gems on it, so you have to move all 4 of the worms, you can choose the order in which to move them. And remember, whenever a worm cannot move in the direction that you rolled, it has to move in the opposite direction first, which you can use. And if that doesn't work, you can choose whichever direction you want, which is also cool. So sometimes you can actually move worms back into the labyrinth again instead of towards the outside. And that is a really nice mechanism. I like that. There's a little bit of take that in there. And of course, all of these cards help with that. There are not many. There's just one of each different type, except for the rotating labyrinth. So we have these 6 different cards that have a little bit of a take that. You can prod a worm, so you can either move a worm to the outside if that is to your benefit, or one of the other worms back towards the center of the labyrinth. So I kind of like that. You can jump walls, you can make a worm pass a turn with the nice cup of tea, etc. So all of these cards do add an extra take that flavor to the game, which I like. But there's only one of each of these, so you won't see them a whole lot. There are not too many cards in the deck. It's just a relatively small deck. I believe there's like 36 gem cards and then plus these added in. So you will go through the deck relatively quickly if you change your hands often. Sometimes we would find that we'd have gems on our hands of a color of a worm that was close to the exit, and you'd hold on to those because you want to score those points, so then you don't cycle through the deck that quickly. But at the start of the game, you can do that a lot. You can just try and get some of these take that cards, these goblin cards, and, you know, manipulate all the worms to your advantage. So I really like that. I like the betting aspect of the game, just to see which worm is going out first. And at that point, you want to hold on to those gems. So if you don't have them, you're going to cycle through the deck quicker. Just discard your hand and draw 3 new cards. Because at the end of the round, those cards are going to score you points. And then you discard those and you keep the colored gems of the worm that exited underneath your token. That's your scoring pile. And the rest is discarded. So if you haven't used those, then they're gone and they're shuffled back into the deck, and you might see them again on the next turn whenever, you know, you continue basically with the remaining worms. So all in all, I really enjoyed the gameplay. At first, when I first heard about this game, I thought it was a very light children's game. And of course it is a light game, relatively light. But it is certainly not only a children's game. I really enjoyed playing this with my wife as well, and with friends. It's just a funny, hilarious racing game. So yeah, all in all, certainly giving that a thumbs up as well. The replayability is also very good due to, of course, the puzzle pieces. You can change the labyrinth every time. It's double-sided. It has the 3, technically 2 rings and a centerpiece, but also you can flip this around. And the difference between these are this one side just has 4 spots that they can freely move across, but the other side has an X in the middle, which is a wall. So every worm starts in its own cubby, so to speak, and only can move outside. So that also adds a little bit of an extra challenge. And then you can just, you know, organize your board any way you want. You can put it together any way you want. And that's different every time. That's a lot of fun. So that does add to the replayability. There is not a single route that is going to be the same. And yeah, so that's good. That adds to the replayability. And of course, because it's a relatively short game, lasts about 20, maybe 30 minutes, you're gonna want to play again right after, probably. At least if you're having fun with this, which I did, I would easily play a second and maybe even a third game. So that's good as well, in my opinion. And finally, there's the language dependency. Except for the goblin cards that have just a little bit of text on them, the game is fully language independent. Once you know the rules, it's a matter of rolling dice and just either keeping the cards with the gems or discarding them and drawing new cards. So all you need to remember is what these goblin cards do. And they are pretty simple. The image on the card almost just completely explains what they do. So even when playing this with my son, who is 8, and has a basic grasp of the English language, and he can read a bit. But even without that, I could easily explain what all the cards do. There's not that many, just these 7 different ones technically. And I explained them what they did and how they worked, and he simply remembered that, and we could just play without doing any reading at all. So that is very positive. So I would call the game language independent, like 95%. And these cards are really easy to remember. So that is still good in my opinion. And you also get these extra added Alexa cards. So if you have an Alexa with the app, then you can actually use these cards, and there are 5 of these. And you can literally say, "Hello Alexa," and Alexa will respond, and then you can say, "Ready, steady, worm," and Alexa will give you, I don't know, actually I don't have an Alexa, but I can imagine that it will give you different ways to play the game, to interact more, like different kinds of take that mechanisms. So I actually kind of want to try that out, but sadly I don't have Alexa. But I think that will add yet more replayability to the game. Of course, that will also be in English, so there is that language dependency for those cards as well. But all in all, in the end, I really did enjoy this game, even though it's a very light game. It's just a dice chucker and moving some miniatures around. But it was a lot of fun, and in the end I'm going to give this a big thumbs up, and I'd also like to thank River Horse for sending the game over for me to review. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you hit the bell icon, you'll also get a notification every time I upload a new video. Please also consider becoming a Patreon saint to my channel. It's a way to support what I do, and you can get your name in the credits of all of my videos and access to some Patreon exclusive videos and articles for as little as just $1 a month or more if you choose to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.